The night I thought I met forever wasn't extraordinary by any stretch. I was just another guy at Victor and Zainab's apartment, a rented place with mismatched furniture and the smell of overcooked samosas hanging in the air. The living room was a patchwork of cheap beanbags and old couch cushions that doubled as chairs. It was one of those game nights where the rules didn't matter, and everyone was a little too competitive to admit they didn't care who won. Victor had texted me earlier in the week, "Bro, we're doing game night. Bring your sarcasm." He knew that was my default setting. I just landed that lead engineering role at Brightlayer Systems, my first real taste of success, and the adrenaline hadn't worn off yet. I felt like I was on the cusp of something big. I'd spent the last 2 years grinding, pushing lines of code like they were the lifeblood of my future, and that night was supposed to be a break from all that. When I walked in, Selena was already there, her laugh echoing off the walls like music I hadn't realized I'd been missing. She was perched on the edge of an old ottoman, holding a card from some new game I'd never heard of, and gesturing animatedly at Zainab, who was doubling over in laughter. Selena's hair was pulled back into a ponytail that seemed to defy gravity, and her eyes sparkled with the kind of confidence that makes you feel like you've met her before, even if you know you haven't. It wasn't love at first sight. That's too easy, too convenient, and too romantic to be real. What I felt was recognition, like I'd found a missing piece that I didn't even know I'd lost. She caught my eye across the room, mid-laugh, and something inside me settled. Not in a falling in love way, but in a this makes sense way. She tilted her head and gave me a smile that wasn't shy or coy, just open, like she'd been expecting me to walk in. Victor roped me into a game of charades, and Selena was my partner by some twist of fate. She was quick, lightning quick, and every guess I made, she seemed to know before I even opened my mouth. We won, of course. We high-fived and grinned at each other like we'd just run a marathon together. After that, we ended up in the kitchen, half leaning against the counter, half in the fridge, trying to find the last of the cold beers before Victor claimed them all. "Idris, right?" she said, her voice smooth like she'd practiced saying my name. "Yeah," I replied, the word catching a little in my throat. "Nice to finally meet you. Victor talks about you like you're some kind of wizard," she teased, rolling her eyes but with a softness that told me she was listening. "More like a wizard's apprentice," I laughed. "I'm still figuring it out." She grinned. "A humble wizard. Rare breed." I found myself telling her about my work at Brightlayer, how I'd just been promoted, how I was leading a team on a new project. She listened, really listened, nodding and asking questions that made me feel like what I did actually mattered. She told me about her job in corporate communications and how sometimes the hardest part was keeping a straight face during board meetings. The night blurred into more laughter, more games, more conversations that felt too easy. Every time I looked around, there she was, either talking to someone else or looking back at me, like we were orbiting the same sun. By the time people started gathering their bags and thanking Victor and Zainab for hosting, Selena and I were leaning against the same wall, our arms brushing like magnets. "Walk me to my car?" she asked, her keys jingling in her hand. "Of course," I said, and I meant it. The air outside was cool, the kind of Nairobi night that smelled like rain even when the clouds were nowhere in sight. We walked slowly, neither of us in a hurry to get to wherever we were going. "Can I confess something?" she said as we reached her car, an old Toyota with more character than chrome. "Anything," I said. She looked at me, her eyes serious for the first time all night. "You're different. I don't know what it is, but I feel like I've known you for a while." I wanted to tell her I felt the same way, but the words stuck in my throat like honey. Instead, I managed, "Yeah, me too." She leaned in and kissed my cheek, a soft, warm press of lips that sent electricity racing down my spine. "Good night, Idris," she whispered. I watched her drive away, taillights blinking like little red promises in the dark. I stood there for a long time, the smell of her perfume lingering in the air, the echo of her laugh still ringing in my ears. That night, I went home and couldn't sleep. I kept replaying our conversations, her smile, the way she'd looked at me like I was already someone important to her. I'd met a lot of people in my life, but no one had ever made me feel seen like that. I didn't know then how much I would give to keep that feeling. I didn't know how many times I'd hold my breath hoping she'd laugh like that again. How many nights I'd lie awake wondering if I'd imagined the spark between us. But that night, standing in my small apartment with the city humming outside, I let myself believe I'd found forever. And for a while, it was enough. We built the kind of life people envied. I'd see it in their eyes at dinner parties when they asked us, "So how's Riverside Heights treating you too?" They meant the gated community with its neat lawns and the smell of fresh paint on every house, the clean streets that felt like they'd been vacuumed before sunrise. We'd moved in right after the wedding. Selena wanted somewhere she could feel secure, somewhere she could show off to her friends. I gave her that without a second thought. I was earning well at Brightlayer, leading a project that made me feel like the world was finally catching up to me. So when she pointed at the glossy brochure for that townhouse, I just said, "Let's do it." We made that place ours. She picked the curtains, white with tiny blue dots that caught the morning light just right. I let her, even when I thought they were too delicate for the modern lines of the place. We argued over the couch color. She wanted something sleek and gray. I wanted something warm and inviting. She won, as she always did, with that smile that convinced me compromise was love. The car was my idea. I'd saved a little extra from a bonus, those bonuses that would later vanish like smoke, and I wanted to surprise her. An electric sedan, brand new, gleaming in the driveway. I remember her face when I led her outside, keys in hand. She looked at the car like it was the crown jewel in some kingdom I'd promised her. She threw her arms around me, whispered, "You're the best, Idris," and I believed her. That night, she posted photos of the car on Instagram, hashtags like #blessed and #besthusbandever. I was proud. Maybe too proud. I thought I was building something real, a fortress against the chaos of the world. But I didn't see the cracks in the foundation. Selena was a master at appearances. The right shoes, the right lipstick, the right caption. I watched her turn every dinner into a photo shoot, every weekend into an opportunity to show the world how perfect our life was. The Bali trip was the peak of that illusion. She'd been talking about it for months, showing me influencers who went there, who drank from coconuts with straws and posed by infinity pools. "It's the honeymoon we never took," she said, and I wanted to give that to her. I wanted to be the husband who said yes. So I booked it. 5 days in a villa overlooking the ocean, the kind of place where the staff knew your name before you even stepped off the plane. We posed for photos. I held her hand on the beach, watched the sunset with her head on my shoulder. It felt like paradise, even when I realized she spent more time choosing filters than actually talking to me. She'd post a photo with a caption like "Forever Us," and I'd believe it because I wanted to. But every time she posted, I saw the likes pile up. I saw the comments from her friends. "Goals, you two are perfect. Teach us your ways." And every time I saw her smile at her screen, I wondered if the life we'd built was really about us, or if it was just a story she was selling to the world. My job made all of it easy. The salary, the perks, the bonuses. I was too busy writing code and managing teams to think about what was happening underneath it all. I thought we were investing in a future. I thought we were saving for kids, for travel, for retirement. But she was investing in the now, in the look of things. Every new thing I bought, every gift I gave, it was like adding another layer of polish to the life she wanted the world to envy. I didn't notice it at first, or maybe I didn't want to. I'd grown up in a family that didn't talk about money unless it was to count it or to remind each other that it was never enough. So when Selena wanted a new phone or a new bag, I just handed over the card. I didn't think about what it meant, what it said about us. I thought love meant never saying no. But then the bonuses stopped. The company started tightening its belt, the whispers about an acquisition getting louder. I tried to talk to her about it. I tried to tell her that maybe we needed to slow down, to think about what was essential. She didn't want to hear it. "We'll be fine," she'd say, waving it off with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're brilliant, Idris. They'll keep you." She said it like it was a fact, like she'd decided it for me. And I wanted to believe her, but every time I saw the accounts, every time I watched the numbers drop, I felt like I was watching our life unravel, thread by thread. Still, I kept giving. I kept buying. I kept building the illusion because I didn't know how to stop. I thought maybe if I just worked harder, it would all balance out. I thought love was sacrifice, and I was ready to sacrifice everything. But the day the bonuses disappeared, I saw it in her eyes. Not fear. Not worry. Disappointment. Like she'd bet on a horse that had stumbled at the finish line. Like I'd let her down by not being the man she thought she'd married. I'd always thought love was building something together, something strong enough to stand against the world. But that night, sitting in the dark living room while she scrolled through photos from Bali, I realized she'd been building something else. A portfolio of images, a gallery of moments that looked perfect from the outside. She posted one last photo that night, us on the beach in Bali, arms around each other, smiling like the world was at our feet. The caption read, "Love is all you need." I stared at that photo for a long time, wondering who she was smiling for. Because it wasn't me. When the bonuses vanished like a ghost from the accounts, it felt like the rug had been yanked from under my feet. But I didn't panic, at least not in the way Selena expected. I'd been at Brightlayer for years by then, and I knew how the company moved when things got tight. Department meetings with too many managers, emails with too many disclaimers. But I also knew what I had. Nimbus Sync wasn't just another protocol. It was mine. I'd spent endless nights fine-tuning its encryption modules, sometimes on company time, sometimes on my own clock. And Brightlayer's IP policy had a clause that gave developers a chance to retain certain rights to their creations, if we had documented our process properly. I had. Every line of code was dated, every module annotated. My own personal repository was ironclad, separate from the company's servers. Some might call it paranoia. I called it insurance. Nimbus Sync was my ticket out of the cycle of bonuses and corporate politicking. I knew its value, security, data management, and a way to bridge legacy systems with modern frameworks seamlessly. Even the CTO had once said, off the record, "Kamau, if this works, it could be our next billion-dollar product." Selena didn't care. Not about Nimbus. Not about the hours I spent coding with the blinds drawn and coffee growing cold beside me. She only cared about the here and now. The fridge emptying, the invitations we couldn't accept, the parties we were no longer hosting because my overtime was spent on something she couldn't see or wear or brag about. I tried to explain it to her once, one night after she'd come back from dinner with her friends, her eyes bright from laughter and wine. "Selena," I said, "Nimbus Sync isn't just a side project. If it takes off, it could change everything." She arched an eyebrow, the kind of look she'd perfected when she wanted to look both amused and unimpressed. "Prophet Idris," she said, drawing the words out like they tasted bitter. "Always waiting for a miracle while our fridge empties and our friends travel without us." Her voice dripped with a kind of disdain I hadn't heard before. I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped. Because what could I say to someone who didn't care about vision or sacrifice, only about now? It wasn't like I'd neglected her. I'd given her the townhouse, the car, the trips. I'd given her the life she wanted, even if I sometimes felt like a ghost in my own home. But she couldn't see the value in waiting for something to bloom. She wanted fruit now, not seeds. She mocked me for my patience, my belief that the future was something worth investing in. She called me Prophet Idris like it was an insult, like hope was something only fools carried. But I carried it anyway. I'd always been that way, even as a kid. I'd hold on to ideas long after everyone else had given up. It was both my curse and my salvation. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit at my desk, the glow of the monitor painting my face, and I'd imagine the day Nimbus Sync would become more than code on a screen. I'd imagine it out in the world, revolutionizing how companies move data, making things safer, faster, better. I'd imagine the looks on their faces when they realized what I'd built. But in the living room, Selena's laughter would echo down the hall. Laughter that didn't include me, didn't need me. She'd be on the phone with one of her friends, Maya, probably talking about dinner reservations or the latest influencer collab she wanted to try. And in those moments, I'd wonder if she'd ever believed in me at all, or if I'd just been another item in her collection of status symbols. Brian, her younger brother, pulled me aside once at a family gathering, his eyes darting around like he was afraid she'd see. "Man," he whispered, "she's not who she used to be." I didn't know what to say to that, because I was starting to believe he was right. I tried to share my vision with her. I tried to make her part of it. But every time I opened my mouth to explain the potential, the market value, the architecture, her eyes would glaze over like I was speaking another language. One night, I'd stayed late at the office, tweaking a new security module I designed to make Nimbus Sync even more bulletproof. I texted her that I'd be home late. No reply. When I got home, the house was dark, the dinner table empty, her car gone. I called her. Straight to voicemail. I waited. Midnight came and went. The clock ticked like an accusation in the silence. She didn't come home until sunrise. I heard the garage door creak open. She didn't say a word, just tiptoed past me in the living room, where I'd finally fallen asleep on the couch. She didn't look at me, not even a glance. I didn't ask where she'd been. I didn't want to know the answer. After that, I stopped talking about Nimbus Sync. I stopped talking about the future. I stopped talking at all. I'd become invisible to her, unless I was disappointing her. I kept my head down at work, documenting every line, every update, every change. I worked late. I worked weekends. I poured everything into Nimbus because it was the only thing that still felt like mine. In the rare moments we did talk, it was all surface, groceries, bills, who was picking up what. The spark between us had gone cold, replaced by a quiet resentment that clung to the walls like mold. Sometimes, when I looked at her, I saw the woman I'd met at that game night. The one who'd laugh like she meant it. The one who'd made me feel like I was enough. But most of the time, I saw a stranger. And I wondered if she felt the same way about me. So I did what I always did when the world felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I focused on what I could control. I focused on Nimbus Sync. I built something she couldn't touch, couldn't claim, couldn't belittle. And in the quiet hours before sunrise, when the world was still, I reminded myself that sometimes the best revenge is survival. Her silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was in the way she walked past me in the morning, a quick glance at her phone instead of a smile. It was in the dinners we didn't share anymore, the kitchen table that felt too big, too empty. I'd always thought love was a conversation, a shared language that held you together even in the worst storms. But with Selena, silence became her preferred dialect. I'd talk, she'd nod, and I'd watch the words fall between us like pebbles into a well with no echo. The night she didn't come home until morning was the final crack in the foundation I'd spent years patching. I'd sat on the couch, half watching the glow of the streetlights outside and the clock on the wall that refused to slow down. Midnight came and went. I thought of all the reasons she might be late, a flat tire, a dead phone, a friend in need. I'd always been good at giving people the benefit of the doubt, but that night the doubt started asking questions I couldn't answer. When she finally walked in at sunrise, her heels clicked against the floor like accusations. She didn't even look at me, just headed to the bedroom like I wasn't there. I didn't follow. I didn't ask. I didn't want to hear the lies she'd rehearse or the anger she'd spit out if I dared to call her out. I sat there, in the hush of a house that felt less like a home and more like a museum to a marriage that had died while I was too busy working. Brian called me that week. Her little brother, though he wasn't so little anymore, was one of the few people who'd always seen me, even when Selena didn't. We met for coffee at a place downtown, the kind of spot with mismatched mugs and chalkboard menus. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him, worry lines carved deep around his eyes. "Man," he said, stirring his coffee until the foam dissolved. "She's not who she used to be." I just nodded, because I'd seen it too. He hesitated, like he was trying to find the right words. "She's different with you. Colder. I don't know what happened, but she's changed." I could have told him that I'd felt that shift for months, that every day with her felt like trying to hold water in my hands. But instead, I just stared at the black swirl in my cup. "Thanks for telling me," I finally said. "It means a lot." We didn't talk much after that. He paid for his coffee, clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "Hang in there." I did. I hung in there like a man waiting for a sign that never came. I stopped mentioning Nimbus Sync. Stopped talking about the patent, about the possibilities. When she asked about work, I gave her the smallest answers I could. One word: lifeless. She didn't seem to care. The silence between us became something I wore like a second skin. Some nights I'd lie in bed, the glow of her phone screen lighting her face as she scrolled through posts and pictures. I wondered what she saw there that she didn't see in me. I wondered if she was picturing a life without me, a life where someone else filled the spaces. I'd close my eyes and remember the game night when we met. The way her laughter had felt like a promise. I'd replay our early mornings in that tiny apartment, coffee mugs lined up like sentries, her voice humming a song I never knew the words to. Back then, I'd thought we were building something real. But what we'd built was a monument to appearances. A house that looked good on the outside but was empty on the inside. A car that shone but took us nowhere. I'd become a ghost in my own marriage. Even at work, I could feel the shift. Nimbus Sync was finished, at least in the sense that the code worked. It was stable, efficient, a product that could change the way Brightlayer moved data. But every time I thought about telling Selena, I heard her voice in my head, that mocking tone she used when she called me Prophet Idris. I could see her eyes rolling, that smirk that said, "Another of your dreams?" So I kept it to myself. I documented everything, every late-night line of code, every test case, every feature. I made sure no one could take it from me, not Brightlayer, not Selena, not even fate. And in that quiet, I found a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Without her voice drowning out my own, I remembered why I'd started Nimbus in the first place. I remembered the spark that had made me believe in the impossible. One night, I stayed at the office long after everyone had left. The city outside was a glow of lights and muffled traffic, the hum of possibility that always seemed just out of reach. I pulled up the final module, my signature piece. It felt like signing my name on a canvas I'd been painting for years. I leaned back, hands behind my head, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. In that moment, I wasn't Prophet Idris or the husband she no longer wanted. I was just me, and that was enough. When I got home that night, she was asleep on the couch, an empty wine glass on the coffee table. Her phone was still in her hand, the screen glowing with half-written messages. I stood there, watching her chest rise and fall, and wondered if she'd ever really known me at all. I turned off the light and went to bed alone. In the silence, I found my voice again. And with that voice came a decision. I wasn't going to wait for her to come back. I wasn't going to chase her laughter or her approval. I was done being a ghost. I didn't know what that meant yet, didn't know where it would take me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. And I promised myself that wherever I was going, I'd walk there on my own 2 feet. The day I came home with the severance letter in my hand felt like the day the world finally pulled the rug out from under me. I'd known it was coming. Brightlayer's acquisition had gutted departments like a bonfire devouring dry timber. One by one, I'd watched colleagues get walked to the exit with cardboard boxes, eyes red from shock. I'd lasted longer than most, maybe because I'd become a fixture, maybe because no one wanted to tackle Nimbus Sync's intricacies. But that morning, my manager called me into a glass-walled office that felt like a fishbowl. He wouldn't even meet my eyes as he slid the envelope across the table. "Idris, it's not personal," he said. The words sounded like he'd rehearsed them, like he'd repeated them a dozen times already that day. I took the envelope, a white rectangle that felt heavier than any box I'd carried. "It's never personal," I said, my voice steady. I'd practiced too. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I walked out of that building with my head high and my heart low. Nimbus Sync was safe. I'd made sure of that. But the job was gone, the team was gone, and the illusion of security I'd built for Selena was gone too. I drove home in silence, the city lights blurring through the windshield, my mind rehearsing how I'd tell her. When I walked through the door, she was already in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone like she was waiting for good news. Her hair was up, lips perfectly lined, like she'd just come back from dinner with someone important. "Hey," I said, and my voice caught a little. I held up the letter. "They let me go." She didn't even pause. Didn't blink. A slow smile crept across her face, a cruel one that I'd never seen before, and she let out a short, sharp laugh that felt like it split the air in two. "Of course," she said, tossing her phone on the counter. "I always knew you'd end up like this. You're not built for the big leagues, Idris." It was like she'd been waiting for this moment, like every fake smile and polite nod had been a countdown to this punchline. My hands trembled as I set the envelope down on the table, but I didn't say a word. I'd been bracing for a fight, for tears, for something human. But she gave me a laugh instead, a sound that tasted like betrayal and relief all at once. I walked past her, straight to the bedroom, and shut the door behind me. I could hear her in the kitchen, opening a bottle of wine, humming a tune I'd never heard before. It was like I'd become a ghost in my own house, a shadow she'd outgrown. That night, I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, every breath heavy with a truth I could not see. She hadn't just given up on me, she'd been waiting for me to fail. Every dinner she'd smiled through, every trip she'd posed for, every compliment she'd given me when the money flowed, none of it had been real. It had been a performance, a role she'd played until the stage collapsed. And now, with the house quiet except for her laughter echoing in my mind, I realized I'd spent years building a life for someone who'd only wanted the applause, not the man behind the curtain. Morning came like a mercy. I got up before she did, moved through the house on autopilot, every room feeling like a stranger's home. When I reached the kitchen table, the divorce papers were there, neatly stacked, a pen resting on top like an invitation. She'd left them out for me. No note, no explanation. Just a signature line with her name already scrawled in that looping, confident script she'd always used when she wanted to show the world she'd already decided. I sat down and stared at the papers. Every line felt like a punch. She wanted everything: house, car, alimony, like my worth could be summed up in a spreadsheet. For a moment, I wanted to fight. I wanted to scream at her, to remind her of every sacrifice, every late night, every bonus I'd poured into her dreams. But then I remembered the look on her face when I told her I'd lost my job, the relief, the satisfaction, and I knew no words would matter. So I took a breath. I picked up the pen, and I signed. But I added one line. One clause that said no future financial claims. A sealed door she'd never be able to walk through again. She signed too, barely glancing at the details, smiling like she'd won. I watched her pack her things, watched her smile at the clothes she'd once insisted I buy, watched her check her makeup in the hallway mirror before she walked out the door. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The house felt bigger without her. Every room echoed with the emptiness she'd left behind. I walked through it, touching the walls, the furniture, the framed photos of a life that had never been mine to keep. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was something else, something I couldn't name at first. And then I realized what it was. Free. I was free. The house, the car, the alimony, she could have it all. I didn't need it. I had Nimbus Sync, the one thing she'd never understood, never wanted to understand. I had my work, my code, my proof that I wasn't built for the big leagues. I was the big leagues. She'd laughed when I fell. She'd walked away thinking she'd won. But she didn't know that sometimes the best revenge isn't winning. It's walking away with your head held high and your heart intact. I stood in the middle of the empty living room and closed my eyes. I let her laughter fade into the distance. And when I opened my eyes, I was alone. But I was also something else. I was enough. I left her world with a quiet exit. No last words, no social media posts, no calls to mutual friends explaining my side. I just packed up what I needed, my laptop, my notebooks, my collection of hard drives and patents, and walked away. It was the easiest thing I'd ever done, and also the hardest. The day I signed the final paperwork, she was already flaunting a new life online. Tarek. The name didn't even deserve the dignity of a last name. He was the kind of man who posed with rented cars and cheap watches, feeding an audience who believed every curated lie he sold. She was by his side now. Smiling, holding his hand at some influencer event, her ring replaced with a new one he probably couldn't even afford. I'd seen it all before. Shiny on the outside, empty in the middle. I used to think I could fill that emptiness for her, that my love, my work, my devotion could be enough. But I learned that you can't build a future with someone who's always chasing the next validation. So I let her have it. The house, the car, the illusion of winning. I gave her everything except the one thing she'd never understand. Nimbus Sync. While she posed for photos with Tarek, I laid low. I hired a quiet, lethal lawyer who specialized in IP protection and trust funds. We structured the sale in a way that would make even the most determined opportunist think twice. When Brightlayer's new executives combed through their archives and found Nimbus Sync, it was like discovering gold under a parking lot. They'd lost too many developers, too many projects to the acquisition, and now they needed something to prove their innovation hadn't dried up. They called my lawyer before they called me. A polite, clipped email. We'd like to discuss Nimbus Sync. The tone was all business, but I could feel the desperation under the surface. My lawyer, a soft-spoken man with a mind like a steel trap, negotiated with the patience of a chess master. Every clause, every share structure, every licensing term was scrutinized, rewritten, and scrutinized again. In the end, Brightlayer offered $80 million. The final amount, after taxes, after structuring, after all the legal wrangling, $67 million. Kamau Innovations Limited was born that day, a trust-owned LLC registered offshore, wrapped in so many layers of protection it would take an army of lawyers to find my name attached to it. That was the point. Not a cent touched my personal accounts. Not a cent could be claimed by a vindictive ex-wife. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle. It was about proving that my work, my vision, my sweat, and my sleepless nights meant something. That they were mine. That no one could just take them because they'd smiled at me once. I remember the day the funds landed in the trust. I was sitting in a small coffee shop near my lawyer's office, a single bulb above the table casting a warm glow on the paperwork. My lawyer slid the final documents across the table and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Kamau. You're officially a wealthy man." I didn't feel wealthy. I felt resolved. I thought about calling her, just to let her know. Just to hear the silence on the other end of the line. But I didn't. Some victories are better left unannounced. Instead, I walked out of that coffee shop into the bright afternoon light. The city felt different, like I was finally walking it on my terms. No illusions, no lies, no pretending. I was free, in a way I'd never been before. Selena would never know. Tarek would never know. They'd live their curated lives online, the hashtags, the fake smiles, the stories that started with, "I always believed in you." even when they hadn't. Let them have it. Let them build their empire of mirrors. I'd built something real, something that would last. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself scrolling through her new life, the photos of rooftop parties, of imported wines and carefully posed selfies. I'd wonder if she missed the way I'd look at her like she was the only one in the room. If she missed the safety of someone who'd always put her first. But then I'd close my phone, lean back, and remind myself that the only thing worth missing was the man I'd been before I met her. The man who believed love could conquer everything, even someone who never loved me back. I was him again, but stronger, wiser, a little colder, maybe. The day the money cleared, I went to a quiet restaurant I used to love. No reservation, no crowd, no photos. Just me and a plate of food that tasted like home. I sat at that table and raised a glass to myself. To every hour I'd spent building Nimbus Sync. To every night I'd slept on the couch waiting for her to come home. To every laugh she'd thrown at me, thinking it would break me. It hadn't. In that restaurant, I made a promise to myself. I'd never let someone else define my worth again. I'd never let someone else's validation determine the value of my work or my heart. I'd learned that freedom isn't about running away. It's about walking away without looking back. The next morning, I went to the office, my office, Kamau Innovations Limited. It was small, just a 2-room suite in a shared workspace downtown. No fancy sign, no glass walls, no ping-pong table. Just a desk, a whiteboard, and a vision. I hired a small team, brilliant, hungry, and unafraid to fail. We weren't building for likes or followers. We were building for the people who needed what we could make. I still think about that day sometimes. The day I realized I didn't need her to believe in me. I just needed me. And that was enough. 3 months later, the email from her lawyer hit my inbox like a bullet. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as I was reviewing a line of code with my junior developer, Maya, who had a knack for catching bugs I didn't see anymore. The subject line was straightforward, clinical, asset disclosure inquiry, Ms. Selena Mwangi. I clicked it open and read the first line. We have reason to believe Mr. Kamau withheld significant assets during the divorce proceedings and therefore request a formal review of the marital estate. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words wash over me. It wasn't shock. I'd been waiting for this since the day she signed the papers with that smug grin. She'd thought she'd won, but greed never stops at one victory. It always wants more. I called my lawyer. His voice was calm, measured. Mr. Kamau, this is a standard post-divorce fishing expedition. We'll respond formally, but let's talk through the details. I exhaled, a slow, measured breath. I'd spent too long letting her laughter echo in my head. Not this time. We scheduled a meeting that afternoon. I arrived early, the smell of stale coffee clinging to the air in the conference room. My lawyer laid out the letter on the table and pushed it toward me. She's alleging you hid assets during the marriage. Specifically, she wants a share of any post-divorce windfalls. I laughed. It was a quiet, controlled sound, more like disbelief than amusement. She thinks she can just dip into the well whenever she's thirsty, I said. He nodded. She's trying. But here's the key, Idris, the patent sold after the divorce. You developed it during the marriage, yes, but you retained the IP rights privately and sold it afterward. Legally, it's not marital property anymore. Plus, he flipped to the divorce decree, the one she'd signed so confidently. You had a sealed clause barring any future financial claims. I remembered that clause like it was yesterday. I'd insisted on it. She'd been so eager to sign, so ready to get to the finish line, that she hadn't even read it carefully. Her lawyer, some junior partner too busy thinking about his next client, had given it a cursory glance and said, "It looks fine." My lawyer continued, his finger tracing the lines of the decree like a roadmap. The judge will see this for what it is, a baseless claim. We'll file a motion to dismiss. I thought about her for a moment, her eyes gleaming as she signed those papers, her laughter echoing as I walked away. She'd thought she'd won. She'd thought she'd broken me. But you can't break what you don't understand. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. I walked into that courtroom wearing my best suit, the same one I'd worn the day Brightlayer gave me my severance letter. I wanted her to see that suit and remember that day. That day she'd laughed at me. She sat across from me with her lawyer, a tall, thin man who looked like he'd walked off a reality show. She didn't smile this time. Maybe she'd started to realize that her games didn't work on me anymore. The judge, a stern woman with a gaze that could freeze a desert, flipped through the file with practiced precision. She read aloud the clause that Selena had signed. Her voice was like a scalpel. You gave up future claims, Ms. Mwangi, she said. That includes windfalls. Selena shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her lawyer leaned forward, trying to salvage something. Your Honor, surely there's a good faith argument that Mr. Kamau's invention was conceived during the marriage and The judge cut him off with a raised hand. Counselor, let me be clear. The asset in question was sold after the divorce. The IP rights were clearly documented as separate property. Your client's claim is without merit. I watched Selena's face fall, that practiced confidence crumbling like a sandcastle. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The judge turned to me. Mr. Kamau, do you wish to respond? I stood, my voice steady. No further response, Your Honor. The facts speak for themselves. She nodded and closed the file with a snap. Motion to dismiss is granted. Ms. Mwangi is hereby ordered to pay Mr. Kamau's legal fees in the amount of 14 million Nigerian nairas. Selena's eyes widened. Her lawyer's jaw dropped. I could almost hear her thoughts screaming. This isn't how it was supposed to go. I left the courtroom that day feeling lighter than I had in years. It wasn't about the money, though the legal fees would cover every invoice I'd racked up. It was about the truth, the validation that everything I'd done, every line I'd drawn in the sand, had been worth it. I walked past her in the hallway. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. I didn't need her explanations, her apologies, her tears. I just kept walking. Outside, the sun was bright, too bright, like the world was mocking me with its optimism. But I wasn't bitter. I was free. I went home that night and poured myself a glass of whiskey. I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker like a constellation. I thought about the boy I'd been when I met her, the man I'd become while loving her, and the man I was now. She'd tried to reduce me to a footnote in her story, a failed husband, a forgotten chapter. But I'd written my own ending, one where I didn't need her approval, her validation, or her applause. The next morning, I got an email from my lawyer. Funds have been transferred, he wrote. Congratulations on a well-fought battle. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint in the glass. For the first time in a long time, I saw a man who wasn't defined by someone else's laughter or someone else's lies. I was me, and that was enough. I could have walked away right then, shaken the dust from my shoes, and left Selena to her influencer parties and late-night wine posts. But the lawsuit she'd filed violated every line of that agreement she'd signed so eagerly. She tried to rewrite the ending of our story with one more legal ploy, one more desperate. Not for revenge, at least, that's what I told myself. It wasn't about the money, though 14 million Nigerian nairas in court costs would certainly make her think twice about calling me Prophet Idris ever again. It was about the principle. You don't get to burn the bridge and then sue the architect. I sat down with my lawyer the next morning. His office was a small, glass-fronted space downtown, lined with books and plaques that said things like professional excellence and best of Nairobi law. He slid a thick stack of papers across the table, each page heavy with the weight of my decision. Are you sure you want to do this, Idris? He asked, his eyes scanning mine for doubt. It's not going to make her like you any better. I let out a low laugh, one that felt like it came from somewhere deep, like a well I hadn't drawn from in years. I'm not looking for her approval anymore. I just want the record to be straight. He nodded slowly. All right then. We'll file for legal damages and recovery of fees, plus a formal declaration that she violated the original agreement by filing a baseless claim. I signed the papers with a steady hand, each stroke of the pen feeling like a piece of closure clicking into place. A month later, the case was scheduled. Courtrooms had always felt like cold places to me, sterile, impersonal, the air too still. This time, though, it felt like a battlefield I'd chosen. I sat on the left side of the room, my lawyer at my side, his tie perfect, his notes arranged like a general's battle plans. Across the aisle, Selena and her lawyer, a different one this time, younger, with a desperation in his eyes that made me think she'd run out of options, sat stiffly, whispering to each other. When the judge entered, I stood, head high. The same judge from the last hearing, her gaze just as sharp, her patience even thinner. She didn't need to be reminded that we'd been here before. My lawyer spoke first, laying out the facts with the precision of a surgeon. Your Honor, Ms. Mwangi violated the divorce decree by filing a frivolous lawsuit with no basis in fact. We're seeking restitution of legal costs, plus damages for breach of contract. Selena's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a single look. Counselor, I read the file. The clause was explicit. She signed it. She cannot now claim she didn't understand the agreement she entered into. Selena's eyes darted to mine, a mixture of anger and disbelief. I stared back calmly. I wanted her to see that the man she'd dismissed as too patient, too trusting, too slow to fight, he'd learned. I wasn't the man who'd sat silent at the kitchen table while she planned her next move. The judge continued, her voice firm. Mr. Kamau's claim for legal costs is valid. The court awards 14 million Nigerian nairas in damages to Mr. Kamau. Ms. Mwangi is ordered to pay this amount within 60 days. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just breathed. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken since the day she'd laughed at me in our kitchen. When the session ended, I stood and gathered my things. Selena's lawyer leaned toward her, whispering urgently. She looked at me like she wanted to say something. An apology, a plea, a scream. I gave her nothing. I turned and walked away. Outside, the air was warm and thick with the scent of rain. I tilted my head back and let the sky wash over me, feeling every drop like a baptism. A man reborn, not by mercy, but by choice. I could have left it there. I could have let the money come and gone, let her live with the cost of her greed. But something in me needed the final word. Something needed to close the chapter on my terms. So I wrote her a letter. Not an email, not a text. A real letter, on paper that smelled faintly of cedar from the drawer I kept it in. I sat at my desk late one night, the city lights painting my walls with gold and shadow, and I let the words come. Selena, I wrote, thank you for walking away. I couldn't have done any of this with your bitterness echoing through my peace. Your silence was more valuable than your support ever was. I wish you all the joy you can find in a world that only sees you as long as you keep posting. But my world? It's different now. My world is built on truth, on code, on work that matters, and on people who see me for who I am, not just for what I can give. There's nothing left between us except this letter. I don't need a reply. I don't need forgiveness. I don't need closure. I got all the closure I needed when you walked away. Take care. Idris. I folded it carefully, placed it in an envelope, and left it with her lawyer's receptionist. She'd get it. She'd read it. And she'd know. 3 days later, my phone rang. Her name on the screen made my chest tighten, but I didn't let it show. I answered, voice calm. Idris, she said. Her voice was soft, uncertain, a tone I hadn't heard since the days we stayed up talking until dawn. I made a mistake, she said, her breath catching. Can we talk? For a moment, I let the silence stretch between us. I thought about all the nights I'd waited for her to come home, all the mornings I'd watched her smile at a screen instead of at me. I thought about every time she'd called me Prophet Idris, every time she'd laughed at the man I was. I exhaled, slow and steady. I'm not angry, Selena, I said. But I'm not curious anymore, either. Some bridges stay burned for a reason. She started to speak, but I ended the call. I set the phone down and looked around my small office, the one I'd built from the ashes of a marriage that had nearly destroyed me. My team was out there, working late, chasing dreams with the same hunger that had once driven me to chase hers. I realized then that the best part of this whole journey wasn't the money or the victory in court. It was that I'd found my voice again. The voice that didn't need her approval. The voice that knew my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's opinion. That night, I locked up the office, walked through the quiet streets of Nairobi, and watched the city lights blur into something almost magical. I felt the weight of every mistake, every betrayal, every lesson I'd had to learn the hard way. And I smiled. Because for the first time in years, I knew who I was. I was Idris Kamau. Not Prophet Idris, not her husband, not a man waiting for someone else to define him. I was my own story now. And that was enough. It took me a while to sit down and write that letter, longer than I'd expected. Even after the court victory, the severance pay, and the patent sold, I couldn't quite bring myself to put pen to paper. It felt final, like chiseling the last word into a stone that marked the grave of something I once thought would last forever. But one evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline and cast a gold glow across my small apartment, I pulled a sheet of thick stationery from my desk drawer and pressed it flat against the table. The city hummed in the background, muted by double-glazed windows, but my world felt quiet, like it had been waiting for me to finish this one last thing. The words came slowly at first. Selena, I began. Even writing her name felt like stirring embers I thought had gone cold. Thank you for walking away. I paused, letting that first sentence breathe, letting its weight settle into the page. It wasn't a letter for her, not really. It was for me. It was a door closing, a final note in a song that had played too long. I kept writing. I couldn't have done any of this with your bitterness echoing through my piece. Every time you doubted me, every time you rolled your eyes at my dreams, every time you called me Prophet Idris like it was an insult, it made me stronger. Your silence taught me to stand on my own. Your laughter taught me not to look for approval in the wrong places. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but the words felt lighter with every line. Your silence was more valuable than your support ever was. I remembered those nights, late dinners alone, her cold voice in the hallway, the smell of her perfume lingering in rooms she never fully shared. I let the memories wash over me, each one a lesson, a reminder of how far I'd come. I wish you all the joy you can find in a world that only sees you as long as you keep posting. I pictured her smiling next to Tariq, camera ready, hashtags ready, like she'd always wanted the world to see her from her best angle. I used to think I was part of that picture, that we were in it together. But I learned that sometimes you're just the man holding the camera. But my world? It's different now. My world is built on truth, on code, on work that matters, on people who see me for who I am, not just what I can give. I thought of my small team at Kamau Innovations, the young developers who called me boss but saw me as a mentor. I thought of Maya, with her sharp mind and easy laughter, who challenged my ideas without mocking them. I thought of the product we were building, not Nimbus Sync, but something new, something that would matter. There's nothing left between us except this letter. I don't need a reply. I don't need forgiveness. I don't need closure. I got all the closure I needed the day you walked away. I signed it simply. Take care, Idris. I folded the letter neatly, sliding it into an envelope that felt heavier than it should have. I wrote her name on the front, in my cleanest script. Then I stared at it for a long time, the way I used to stare at her when she walked into a room, hoping I could hold her attention for just a moment longer. This time, I didn't need her to look back. I dropped the letter off at her lawyer's office the next morning. The receptionist gave me a polite smile as she accepted it, oblivious to the weight it carried. I walked out into the Nairobi sun feeling like a man who'd set down a burden he'd been carrying for far too long. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. Her name lit up on the screen, the same name that used to make my heart race. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, calm and steady. Idris, she said, her voice softer than I remembered. I made a mistake. I let the silence stretch, letting her feel every second of it. Can we talk? She asked, her voice trembling. I thought about all the nights I'd sat waiting for her to come home, all the times I'd asked her to talk and she'd turned away, the look of disdain on her face as if my words were too heavy for her to carry. I thought about every time she'd called me Prophet Idris, mocking my faith in things that hadn't happened yet. I took a deep breath. I'm not angry, Selena, I said, the calm in my voice surprising even me. But I'm not curious anymore, either. Some bridges stay burned for a reason. She tried to say something else, but I ended the call. I set the phone down, my hand steady, my heart still. I stared out the window, the sun warming the edge of the desk, the city alive with possibility. I'd never felt so at peace. That night, I took myself to dinner. A small place, tucked in a side street where the owner knew my name and brought me extra bread without asking. I sat at a corner table with my laptop open, reviewing lines of code that felt more like poetry than work. Maya called me with a question about the new module, her voice bright even over the static of a poor connection. You think we can push the update tomorrow, boss? She asked. Let's do it, I said. You're ready. Thanks, Idris, she said. You always make me feel like we're building something real. I closed the call and smiled, because we were. I thought about Selena and the life I'd left behind, about the laughter that had turned cold, the promises that had faded, the love that had withered like a neglected plant. I'd loved her once, but love without respect is a wound that never heals. I learned to bandage it myself, learned to walk without limping. People ask me sometimes if I miss her, if I ever think about the life we could have had. I don't. I think about the life I have now. A smaller apartment, yes. Fewer photos, sure. But more space to breathe, more room to grow. I think about the code on my screen, the team that looks up to me, the product we're about to launch. I think about the nights I sleep without waiting for a door to open. I think about the silence that's finally a comfort instead of a threat. When she laughed at me that day, I told her I'd lost my job. Something inside me shattered. But the pieces didn't break. They rearranged themselves into something stronger. When she left, I found my own voice. When she sued, I found my own power. When she called, I found my own peace. And when I wrote that letter, I found my own ending. I don't know where she is now. I don't know what she's doing or who she's laughing with. I don't need to. Because this is my life, my story. And for the first time in a long time, I'm exactly where I want to be. My name is Idris Kamau, and this is my chapter. People still ask me how Selena is doing. It always comes from a place of polite curiosity, like they're asking about an old friend, a high school sweetheart, someone who used to matter but no longer plays a role in my daily life. And I always give the same answer. I don't know. And that's the best part. Because I really don't know. I don't check her social media anymore. Don't follow the hashtags or the filtered photos. I don't know which influencer parties she's attending, or which trips she's booked with Tarek, or whoever replaced him. I don't know if her hair is still that same shade of caramel brown, or if she's moved on to something new. I don't know if the laughter she posts online is real, or if it's just another performance in the endless feed. And the best part? I don't care. I don't need to know. My life isn't built on her anymore. My sense of worth doesn't come from her approval or her presence or her absence. It comes from me, from the life I've built brick by brick, line by line, code by code. Every morning, I wake up in a smaller place than the one I shared with her. It's a 2-bedroom flat in Kilimani, a modest neighborhood with more charm than status. The walls are painted a soft cream that glows in the morning sun, and there's a small balcony where I drink my coffee and watch the city come to life. No manicured lawns, no security gates, no pressure to keep up appearances. I like it this way. The windows are big, letting in the kind of light that makes me feel awake even before the first sip of coffee hits my tongue. There's a small shelf of books near the window, novels I've been meaning to finish, technical manuals I love more than I'll ever admit. There's a photo of my parents on their wedding day, smiling like they believed in forever. I keep it there to remind me that love doesn't always last, but sometimes it does. The living room is cluttered with cables and half-assembled hardware projects, prototypes of things my team and I are working on. Kamau Innovations Limited has become more than just a shell company. It's a small, determined team of developers and engineers who believe in building things that matter. We work on data encryption systems for hospitals that can't afford the big-name security solutions. We build affordable tech tools for schools in rural areas. We're not making billions, but we're making a difference. And that feels like a better kind of wealth. Maya is still with me, and she's grown into a force of nature, leading projects, mentoring interns, catching mistakes I miss. Sometimes we stay late at the office, the two of us hunched over our screens, arguing about which framework will scale better. She's become the little sister I never had, and I'm proud of her in a way that surprises me sometimes. Sometimes, at the end of the day, I close my laptop and just watch the sunset through the window. The sky over Nairobi glows like a promise, orange, pink, gold, and I think about all the things I thought I'd lost when Selena left. I thought I'd lost my future, my pride, my sense of self. But standing here now, I realize that all I lost was an illusion. A life that was never really mine to begin with. I don't miss the drama. I don't miss the nights I spent waiting for her to come home. I don't miss the way she made me feel like a supporting actor in my own life. I don't miss the laughter that felt like a knife. Sometimes people ask me if I'd ever let her back into my life if she apologized. I think about it honestly. I think about the look in her eyes that night in court when the judge dismissed her claim. I think about her voice on the phone when she said, "I made a mistake." And then I think about the man I am now, the man who doesn't need to be defined by someone else's mistakes. The man who doesn't need an apology to move on. The man who knows his worth without needing it stamped by someone else's approval. No, I wouldn't let her back in. Because I've learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reopening the door. Sometimes it means closing it gently and walking away without regret. My friends sometimes tell me I'm lucky. You got out early, they say, like I escaped a house on fire. And maybe they're right. But luck had nothing to do with it. It was choice. It was refusing to let her laughter define me. It was finding my own voice in the quiet she left behind. I'm not chasing revenge anymore. I'm not chasing validation. I'm chasing the quiet kind of success, the kind that feels like a warm light in the chest, the kind that doesn't need to be posted online to matter. I'm chasing the life I thought I'd have with her, but I'm building it alone, and it's better that way. Sometimes I pass by Riverside Heights on my way to a client meeting. I drive past the gates and the manicured lawns, the shiny cars parked in the driveways. I think about the man I was when I lived there, so sure that love was something you could buy with a good job and an electric sedan. I think about the laughter that used to fill those rooms, laughter I thought was shared but was really just for the camera. I drive on by. I don't stop. I don't look back. When I get to my office, the small one with the whiteboard covered in scribbled ideas and half-finished diagrams, I feel more at home than I ever did in that townhouse. My team greets me like a leader, not like a prop in someone else's story. We share coffee, bad jokes, the occasional late-night takeaway. It's messy and real and sometimes hard, but it's mine. When she laughed, I broke. When she left, I began. And that, standing here in the glow of the Nairobi sunset, my laptop humming, my team's laughter drifting in from the next room, that is the real beginning. Because this story was never about her. It was always about me. My name is Idris Kamal. I'm not the man she called Prophet Idris, waiting for a miracle. I'm the man who built his own. And in the quiet that follows, I'm finally at peace.